social researcher and publisher Maggie Hamilton. Maggie gives regular talks, lectures and workshops throughout Australia and New Zealand and is a keen observer of social trends. And together we have decided that I'm going to cut down her introduction and you can read it on your program because we want to give Maggie her full time. But suffice to say, Maggie is the boys' part of the Steve Biddulph and Maggie Hamilton duo. So would you please join with me in warmly welcoming Maggie Hamilton.
Thanks very much, Elizabeth, and thank you to Anglicare for making this possible today. It's a tremendous privilege to come and talk to people who are brave enough, who have the vision enough to care about a lot of people who get forgotten about in society, and it's deeply humbling to be able to address you today because I'm so aware of the extraordinary work you do. I research it. I don't have to be at the coalface every day dealing with it. And I can tell you I have had some huge dark nights of the soul just doing the research that I've done, particularly around pornography. Some of the material I am going to talk about today is a little bit disturbing, but it really is indicative of the kind of things that our boys and our girls are dealing with. As a researcher, what interests me is getting under the skin of, I think because I'm a particularly curious person. My husband's always saying to me I stare at people on the bus and things and it drives him mad. He's always telling me to stop staring. But people fascinate me, and what I wanted to do, which I did first with the girls and then with the boys, we see a lot of dysfunctional behaviour. You see it all the time. It's nothing new to you. And, you know, you see the Britney wannabe or whatever, and it's like, oh, what's with them kind of thing. But what I wanted to do was to try and get under the skin of 21st century kids and understand how it is kind of looking out from their point of view, that makes sense. But the other thing that I tried to do with the research was to have that very intimate look, but also to really look at the landscape that is shaping our children, their aspirations, their anxieties, what they're preoccupied with. So what I've tried to do today is to just pick out some key factors and hopefully it'll be really helpful to you. The first thing that I noticed when I got into my research was that, we talk about this generation as one big generation, but in fact, what I see is that it's like we have a collection of micro-generations within this one generation. And what do I mean by that? I mean what a 9-year-old child in a family is aspiring to, worried about, etc., wearing, wanting to consume is not what their 13-year-old sibling was wanting at 9. And it is about a 3 or 4 year gap that I've noticed. And this came about because the kids themselves, I'd be interviewing a 15-year-old and they would talk to me about the very risky behaviours they were seeing with kids coming into high school and things like this. And I started to notice it's a 3 or 4 year gap. And of course it's moving all the time because we're living in such a time of change. So in working with the kids you are working with, I think it's really good to look for those nuances because it kind of gives a deeper way in, if that makes sense. So that it's not just the 9-year-olds, even that you might have been dealing with 2 or 3 years ago, being exactly the same. Does that make sense? And those nuances, of course, we know are really helpful. Another thing, of course, that we're facing in society is not only our boys in crisis, and I feel sorry for our boys, because I feel there are a whole lot of things we didn't get right for them before the 21st century issues hit. So for me, looking at it, I actually feel they've got a double whammy anyway. And then, of course, on top of that, we have parents who are in a state of real anxiety and stress because they too have become victims to this whole marketing culture and the cool factor. And I do a lot of talking to parents across the country. And one of the things I say to them, it's time to make uncool parenting super cool. To try and break that thing of not listening to the gut. This is how insidious the marketing is. Parents allow kids to go off and do stuff, wear stuff, etc., that in their gut, they know is wrong, and as we know, that gut thing is so important in our human compass, but it overrides that. And that is because pop culture and marketing, I believe, is the super parent. I don't think it's alongside anymore, it's above, and we'll get a sense of that later. Another thing I think that really hit me when I got talking to these kids was that they are living in a performance culture where they have to be amazing 24/7. Can you imagine the stress of that? And I'm not just talking about teenagers. My research actually began at birth. I hadn't intended it to, but I just went back to birth as a backdrop, and it really kind of changed everything, and I'm glad I did. This is happening at preschool, and I think this is where a lot of our issues that our young people are facing now, this is where the self-loathing and anxiety is beginning. We'll talk about that. So this whole thing of performance, which of course is not a genuine human interaction with the world. Performance is about artifice, and this is one of the problems that our kids are facing. Another thing that is, I believe, very, very toxic for our kids is reality TV. And I only discovered this when I was talking to a whole variety of school counsellors across the country who said to me that what they had noticed was that bullying had been notched up to a whole other level when reality TV came in. And when I heard it the first time, I thought that's interesting. And you know what it's like, sometimes you have to hear it 3 or 4 times before you really go away and think about it. And so I did. And then I realised, well, yes, it's an incredibly psychologically cruel encounter often. It's humiliating people, getting to them to do stuff they would never dream of normally. And it's that dark thing of dividing the world into winners and losers so that all the beautiful nuances we have of difference are forgotten. But it's a more uncertain world and an even darker world than that, because today you might be a winner and tomorrow you might be cast out. So it plays on that primal fear that we all have that one day we're going to be cast out of our tribe and forced to wander the world unhonoured and unsung. A very deep fear we all have. And so it gets our kids into survival mentalities so that you're in a friendship group today and something awful's happening. It might be happening to your best friend and you hate it. Again, you know in your gut, that inbuilt compass, it's wrong, what's happening. But when you're in survival mode, there's something else that takes over that you're probably very familiar with in your work. You're so relieved today it's not happening to me. And so you say nothing, and it's perpetuated. And so what I saw when I was interviewing these kids was how over time and time again, with their good friends, not the ones who are frenemies or are enemies, are playing the reality TV way of treating each other all the time. And we'll look at that a bit further in a sec. Another thing I'm very concerned about is story. And I grew up in the 50s, and you know, I had this Greek and Roman myths, the spiritual stories we had at Sunday school and church, and of course the Grimm's fairy tales, and all those things, that fabric of relating the world taught my generation that, you know, life wasn't easy and that people you love betray you and so on, and sometimes terrible sacrifices called upon, etc., etc. But, and this is the big but, there was always transcendence. And as a race, a human race, we must always have hope and transcendence. What concerns me about what's happening at the moment is our children are living in what I call freedom furniture homes, and I'm not knocking freedom because I have some freedom furniture at home as well, but you know what I mean? The global thing's just so ghastly, so you'll renovate the kitchen and you feel you're back in your life and you'll get a new wardrobe and you might lose a bit of weight and suddenly somehow that's supposed to magically change everything. And as we renovate, all that stuff that holds our story is often lost. It's tossed away because it's old-fashioned. And so our kids are left with two things. They're left with the dysfunctional stories of the celebrities, and with our boys, and I'm desperately concerned about this, and we're going to look at it in a bit more detail in a minute, these seriously dark apocalyptic stories. I'm in inner city Sydney. I was until I've relocated a few weeks ago, but I've for a number of years, I've actually judged short story competitions with our local library for 8 to 10-year-olds. I cannot tell you how dark those stories are. If you were to read them, it would make your hair stand on end, which my hair does quite naturally. But seriously, they are so violent and dark. In my darkest day on this planet, I could never imagine writing a story with such darkness in it. This is normal for them, and this is why. Okay, so these are the stories our boys are growing up with. Before we get into the detail, I just want to talk about, I mentioned a minute ago that for our poor boys, there's a whole lot of stuff we didn't get right before the 21st century hit. And I feel we still, and Steve has done an immense amount of work on this, and I totally honour him for it. But as a nation, in fact, many nations throughout the West, we still are not nourishing that emotional life of boys enough. And that is what where part of the humanity is contained. And this is so important because our boys are going to inherit a world that is so much more sophisticated than the leap we made from childhood and teenage life to adulthood. It's a very sophisticated life out there, sophisticated relationships for boys, sophisticated workplace, work environment, so I really feel that's very important. So let's have a look at where boys are right now. Let's talk about the little ones to start with. I did another big study on boys before I got to What's Happening to Our Boys, which the piece of research that became the book What's Happening to Our Boys. 3 years previous, it was a couple of years research, which was looking at the lives of men and boys and real men and boys as compared to the stereotypes. And that changed my life, gentlemen, I have to say. You know, I thought I was a pretty well-educated, well-informed woman, and I realised I knew nothing about men. And there's still a lot to learn. One of the first things I found when I got into that research, which really shocked me, was that more little boys, baby boys, die in the womb than do girls at birth. Many of you may know this, and in the first year of life. And yet from the moment they pop out, or even before that, we've already decided they have to be strong and independent. And so what we tend to do is distance, and this of course is where the lack of emotional warmth we don't give our boys enough of. There was a beautiful piece of research done, and I think it was Duke University, but I might be wrong, and it was actually in the 70s. It's a very old piece of research where they took girls and boys 3 to 6 and they put them in a room, and their mum, it was one of those one-way mirror scenarios, and their mum, they were shown a series of visuals and they had to work out which ones were, the mums had to guess which ones were the kind of scary visuals, the funny ones, and the nondescript. Guess what happened? The mums of the girls had no problems at all. They could hear the kids as well. They could hear the girls verbalising. They could see their facial expressions. They could see their body language. Guess what? Most of the mums, even from little boys 3 up, could not guess which visual they were looking at. But this was a very elegant piece of research. And what they did was they hooked the kids up so that they were testing blood pressure, etc. And guess what they found? There was no difference in emotional response. Our boys and our men have all the emotional responses intact. What we do, though, is we force them to carry it inside. And then that comes out in ways that isn't helpful. People like Michael Thompson, and many of you may have read the book Raising Cain, Dan Kinlan's beautiful book on boys. He works with seriously at-risk boys in the States. You know, the Latino kid who stabbed somebody at 14 and ended up in the judicial system. And he said one of the biggest indicators he noticed with those seriously at-risk boys is they have no emotional repertoire. So when things go wrong, they tend to go with that fight or flight, mainly fight. And so this is what we see. And as Michael Thompson is pointing this out as well, I think one really interesting thing is he's talking about, from his research, by 8 or 9, boys are looking at everything in terms of strengths and weaknesses. And we know what that means. That's kind of more the survival mentality. Another thing, of course, is our little boys are growing up, as well as our little girls, in these homes with, you know, the big plasma TV. And I love this visual because it kind of shows how dwarfed our children are by that wall-to-wall sound. And research coming out of the UK is really showing in terms of language acquisition, if they're in, particularly boys, because we know they're wired differently and communication is harder for them initially, unless we make that up with lots of good verbal stuff at home and reading. And this is really compromising our boys, because not only are they not getting read to and they're in front of TV all the time, but they're not practicing language. So let's get into the research and the marketing. The marketers absolutely have our children in their sights to a level that I had not understood. They have known for a very long time that babies can retain branded logos, but it wasn't until 1999 they knew how to product place from 6 months. And this is how it goes. It was Professor James McNeill, who's one of the global phenomenons in marketing. He noticed that when little ones start to sit up, they don't sit up like we do because their spines aren't so able to do so. So they tend to hunch forward like little bears, and they dribble a lot. And he suddenly realised he'd found the holy grail of advertising and product placement to the very young, which he thought was worth millions, which was totally understated because it's worth billions. And that is all these fun figures we're familiar with, whether it's Bob the Builder, Winnie the Pooh, whoever. Basically, today, they are brand logos because each one of those properties is worth billions to the corporations, not millions, billions. And if you place that fun figure on a baby's bib, a t-shirt, in a certain place and on the crotch of their nappies, product placement begins there and then. And why? Because when you start to sit up, you dribble a lot, and you stare down at your dribble for extended periods. And he's a smart man, he's a professor, he did his work, and he said you get this into the home at 6 months, and by the time that child is 2, even if they don't have the language for it, although often children do, you're in a supermarket, often in the cereals aisle, of course, or food aisle with all that junk food, or you're in the mall somewhere and you see a fun figure, the child's face lights up, you can't get your hand into the wallet quickly enough to buy the jocks and socks. Most importantly for the corporates, you buy the DVD, which is just an animated ad, which you take home and you play over and over and over again. And then we wonder why these children are so programmed to have all this stuff. It's interesting when you start to read the literature, and you've got to search for it because it's not, I'm in Sydney. I went to Sydney Uni and studied the text that tomorrow's marketers are going to use to flog stuff to us. It's so cold. You really get that sense of our children just being there to make money, as we see here with this James McNeill quote, and it's so insidious, children attaching themselves to a pillow, blanket, store, a brand. It's all kind of as if it's all the same. So what's happening to our little boys, of course, little girls as well, is they're growing up in rooms of branded junk. And when I came across this, I just felt desperately sad. Actually, I felt like crying. I thought it's a sign of a society that preys off its kids. It's a really society that needs to take a good hard look at itself, basically. So I thought there's no point in me just kind of getting depressed about this and having to have a big slice of chocolate cake. I need to go off and talk to people who know and ask them if they've seen any difference. And so I did, and I went to talk to preschool professionals who've been teaching at least 10 years. And this is what they said to me. They said they are seeing elevated levels of anxiety in preschool they've never seen before. Serious anxiety. And I said, what are we talking about here? I didn't mention marketing or shopping, by the way, or anything like that. I just said, are you seeing any difference in the kids today as compared to a decade ago? And they said, the little boys and little girls, of course, do I have the right brand of backpack, lunchbox, etc.? Do I have the right hair for preschool? Do I have the right clothes for preschool? Do I have the right body? These are little boys, 3 to 5, they haven't even learnt to read or write yet or go to school. There were many things they told me. Another important thing is that they said they're seeing a radical drop in imagination. And they gave me lots of examples, but I'll give you one. They said in the playground what they're seeing, instead of, boys playing at being an astronaut, a scientist, or whatever, they are playing the scripts of the DVDs they have watched over and over. Now, you and I know imagination is not just about whether a boy's going to wander around with a beret on his head splashing paint on a canvas. How wonderful that is. It's about having a goal for yourself, having a vision, being able to deal with difficult people and situations. It's a vital life skill. And as the globe has a lot of things happening at the moment, we need to be nourishing children to be 100, 1,000 times more imaginative than us. Not through hothousing, but through the nourishment that we've heard about this morning. Getting them actively engaged in life in a way that they're excited to be part of this planet. So since then, of course, there are many other insidious ways that kids are marketed to, which I don't have time to mention to you today, other than to say that boys are the last demographic the corporates haven't got stuck into. And they realised this about 3 years ago. So they've been pouring millions, Disney, Nickelodeon, the fashion industry, toiletries, literally millions. And you might have noticed this, you know, your 8-year-old boy or 15-year-old boy, you can't get him to put a comb through his hair, let alone take the t-shirt off him, because he's so attached to it and because he's not thinking about what he wears. You notice how different it is for boys in the last 3 years. And guess what? They are now going down the same trajectory as girls in terms of body issues and other stuff. And so what we're seeing is also this trend of dressing our kids as if they're mini versions of us, mini adults. You know, this narcissistic society we're in, you know, this reflection of me. I've got the designer dog, the handbag. I've kitted the kid out with designer clothes and, you know, I'm feeling pretty fabulous for 2 minutes. So this is creating great anxiety because you notice with the little boy in the middle, for instance, it's not about pulling on your woolly hat so that you can go outside because it's cold. He has to spend time getting that just right. And the message is, I am nothing without my possessions or how I look. So boys are getting this as well. What's interesting about the advertising, we know it's sexualized, but something else here. Mark Crispin Miller's work's wonderful as a media and social critic, pop culture critic. And what he says is that, and I've seen this time and time again because I've looked into it, is that advertising is undermining the gatekeepers at every opportunity, offering stuff that is inappropriate, etc. And so the message is, well, mum and dad, they're so yesterday, your teachers are idiots. Come to us, we look after you. We'll raunch it up. We're not afraid to speak your language. So let's have a look at teenage boys' lives for a minute. Because of all the things I've talked about, boys worry about acceptance too now. Worried about dress. In case you're not up with your celebrity kids, this is Romeo Beckham. And he was voted, I can't remember whether he was 7 or 8 when these pics were taken, but I think it was 7, he's now 8. He was voted the world's best dressed bloke. And his dad was like 16th. And when I felt that, it's like a stake to the heart. And I thought, that's bloody Victoria, excuse my language, Victoria Beckham. She's always had an eye for the ka-ching. And she can see a corporation in the making with this kid. And this is what it's about. It's about money. And then you look at the role models. You know, we've got people like Snoop Dogg, who he's now been here a number of times, and people treat him like some sort of hero. The guy's a pimp, for heaven's sake. Seriously. Okay, so let's have a look at them during the tween life. And we've got to race through this a bit, but I think it's really important to go through this because I think so often the issues seriously surface, as we know, during the teenage life. But I guess what I was so excited about with my findings is that if we can start the interventions at preschool, then we help mitigate a lot of the teenage issues. So our tweens, we never had tweens until a few years ago when the advertisers, of course now they use cultural anthropologists, they use neuroscientists, they use everybody, degraded scholarship really to press all the buttons. And they suddenly realised the 6 to 12-year-olds were really ripe for the picking. And so we had the tweens, and now of course they're heavily marketed to, we know all about them. So what we know is with this demographic, they're desperate to be teenagers. Now, you know, when we were growing up, particularly those of us who've been around a while, you know, you had that momentary flash, you know, you'd like to wear high heels, which were probably about that high then, or something like that. But there was no opportunity for you to articulate that. So then you kind of, the thought went and you got back on being a 6-year-old, 7-year-old, 8-year-old. Not now. The marketers are really smart. They say, we can help you be a little teen. We've got the crop top, we've got the this, that and the other. And for the boys as well, the hair products, etc. Belonging is very important to this demographic, and they also don't want to stand out to be different. So what have the marketers done? Buy our board shorts, buy our sunnies, wear this hair product. You won't stand out, but you will belong. This is where online friendships begin, and when, of course, at this stage, they don't get they're being marketed to. It's also the time when they get seriously into celebrities. And it starts with the tween celebrities, but they don't stay there long. And before you know it, they're into the much older celebrities and all the values and dysfunctional behaviour that come with those people. What's interesting when you look at the marketing is how clever, and you can look at it for McDonald's with the McMeals, Burger King. They have incredible websites where you can spend hours and hours and hours there having fun. There's video stuff, there's games, you name it. It's a world in itself. And of course, you just happen to get the preview of a whole lot of product. All this is happening right under our noses. And it's designed that way so that the gatekeepers have no idea what's going on. We talk about the sexualisation of older girls and what it's like for girls in this climate. But I really want us, and I'm sure you've already had these thoughts anyway, to imagine what it is like being a boy in this climate today. How utterly confusing. And I deal with a number of clinical psychologists who run rape crisis support, and what's really interested me, even though they're seeing horrendous things, they have a tremendous compassion for boys, and they talk about this climate as being really abusive to boys and turning them into predators. And it's starting very young, and I think games like this are actually from the porn industry, because I don't know who else would put these up. Let me tell you a bit about them. If you're a little boy, 5 or 6 or thereabouts, up, there's all these free games on the net, and most of them, there's a lot of them quite innocuous games. But seated in amongst these are these very sexualised games. I've just chosen a few. The one on the left is called Girls with 2 R's, and the screen explodes with these giant breasts and baby girl faces. This one here at the right, top right, is called Red Carpet Girl. And every time you do something right in the game, you get to strip an item of clothing off there. Oh, it gets worse. This one is called Naughty Classroom. And the whole idea of this game is to look at your teacher's breasts, if possibly look down her top at her breasts, and if you can, look up her skirt at her panties. And if you manage to do this without her seeing you, you get extra points. Now, I don't know why you would do that unless you were part of the porn industry. And by the way, we are now seeing, and you would probably know this anyway because you'd be seeing it yourself, we are now seeing a lot of sexual assault at primary school level. And previously that was, as you know, always associated with, having had some sort of sexual interference at home. Increasingly, that is because of online porn experiences. What we are now seeing, we have seen the sexualisation of our teen girls for some time. I am seriously concerned about this for our girls and boys. We are now seeing it for tween girls. This is one little girl in Vogue, French Vogue recently. I mean, I could give you loads of examples. But you just see what's happening here. This is a time, and I'm sure this is no surprise to you, when the trafficking of children, third world children for first world sexual needs has never been higher. I mean, this stuff is seriously sinister. And of course, we're all aware of sexting, but what we're now seeing is sexting is beginning in our primary schools from age 8 up, not just at high school. And this is when they're getting the phones. And at 8, it's starting with bare breasts. And by the time they get to high school, a lot of stuff that they're doing would make any X-rated movie proud. Objects inserted into different orifices, etc., etc. It's terrible for the girls, but what's it like if you're a little 8-year-old boy and you're starting to be exposed to this? And this is why, as I said, I do a lot of talks to parents, which I love, because I feel when they have this knowledge, it empowers them to make good decisions, hopefully, and to understand they need to be talking about these things with kids a lot earlier than we'd expected to in previous generations. The other thing about tween life is they're living in a world of packaged information and entertainment, very passive, not thinking about life, not learning about life as we did, being in the community. You're being fed it. And so it's creating a generation, and these are broad generalisations. Of course, there are great engaged kids out there, but very passive. And that's great for the marketers because these kids don't feel they have choice around a lot of issues. If you really want to know more about tween life, the global marketing Bible is Brandchild, and it's really worth reading, by Martin Lindstrom. This is something else that I just wanted to mention in my research that I'd never really thought about, but it's become very fashionable with the women's movement. I'm not knocking the movement because we so need it, but there's always aspects that aren't good. And one of them is us girls. It's very trendy to kind of knock men and lots of stupid jokes. Oh, so stupid, Homer Simpson stupid, or dark and dangerous. But we don't think about the impact these narratives have on boys. A generation of boys who are hugely underfathered. Where do they get those hints about what good, beautiful, empowered men are? And so it is really up to us girls to talk about that and not to be tempted down this other avenue. I've bought the cards and done all those things, and now I see them and I just cringe at having done that. So what the corporations do is they take very tender, very powerful aspects of our boys' lives and they turn them into products. And of course, one of the things is all our little boys want to be heroes. Our big boys do too. We need heroes. But of course, what they do is turn it into something dark. If you talk to the preschool teachers again, they say Ben 10 has been a nightmare. It has caused a lot of violence in preschool. I'm not talking about that wonderful rough and tumble that boys have, but laying into other kids and not wanting to stop. And then they graduate to things like Grand Theft Auto. I'm sure you all know Grand Theft Auto. The statistics show that parents, it's only about 2 or 3% of parents have ever watched the games. We have a loophole here in Australia with the video games. It's rated M15, but the loophole is if mum and dad take you into the store and you're 7 or 8 and they're happy for you to have the game, you can have it. They're so clever, these companies. And so, of course, you know, the 7-year-old has seen it at somebody else's place, and before you know it, they've got Grand Theft Auto too. The whole point of this game is to progress up the world of organised crime. You do this by killing cops, stealing cars. Now, we can talk about that broadly, and it kind of washes over you, but I'm going to take you through one scenario to show you how evil it is. And evil wasn't a word I used a lot before I did this research, I have to say, but I do now. And that is where your avatar has decided tonight they're going to kill a prostitute. So you have to wait in the game till it goes dark. You get in your car and you drive to the red light part of town. Can you see what this is training our boys? And you cruise up and down the streets and you look at all the prostitutes until you decide you find one you're going to kill. You get her in the car and you take her to a deserted spot because the whole point is to kill her and not be caught. And as she's a prostitute, you might as well have sex with her. So you pay her and you have sex with her in the car. You see all this. Then you're going to kill her, so you might as well get your money back because you know how you're going to kill her. So you drag her out of the car. It's a deserted spot. And you have a baseball bat and you bludgeon her to death. You see it, you hear it. The first time an academic friend and colleague, Wayne Warburton, who's at Macquarie Uni, showed us this video clip, there were a handful of us, and I knew the scenarios, but I hadn't seen this. We all wanted to vomit. It was so horrendous. Then when you've killed, and the sound effects, everything, it's horrendous. Then when you kill the person, you don't want to be found out, so you go to the back of your car, go in the boot, get out a can of petrol, douse her with the petrol, and you set her alight. That is just one of the many things that you can do in Grand Theft Auto. If you know your way around it, you can have sexual encounters with other avatars, almost any type of sexual permutation you may or may not have thought about. This is seriously sick stuff. I could go on and on about this, but time's short. When Grand Theft Auto came out a little while ago now, it grossed $500 million in the first week. All this boils back to making money. And of course, now it is used to groom our boys. A number of countries around the world, America for instance, they had problems with recruitment for Afghanistan and Iraq. Just had a mental blank. Iraq, yes. Sorry. So they got video games going. And if you notice here, this is all the game about the army, careers, benefits, soldier life, etc. Now, I met a wonderful SAS soldier recently who's gone on this huge journey as a man, and he's involved in the men's movement, a deeply beautiful man. And he said he was actually in Iraq in the early days, training the local guys to be commandos. And he said, Maggie, he said the place was full of young boys who had played the game and wanted to do it for real. Again, something inside cries, because this is not about humanity. Okay. When I talk to boys about the video games, they see it quite differently. You know, these kids spend a lot of time on their own, so video games are actually great company. And you make friends, you know, online as a result of it. What I found with our kids is a lot of them are so stressed from so young, and they actually see the game as a release. It's exciting, and then of course it gives them a sense of power, distorted sense of power. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we were able to create more situations in the community where boys were able to be real heroes, not virtual mass murderers? What Dorothy was talking about this morning, where they could do something that's seriously heroic and have their humanity grown and have a vision of themselves. What I also find is that this generation is so seriously lacking sleep. I was talking to boys who said that, you know, they tended to, you know, they might pretend they're going to sleep, but they tended to go to sleep about 1 during the school week, except they're so wired from all their experiences, often it takes 2 hours to get to sleep. Talk to boys who weren't going to bed till 3, and of course then they crash at the weekends, and that puts their biorhythms out even more. And this affects their ability to learn, to interact, and so on. Susan Greenfield, who's one of my heroines, the neuroscientist, she comes here from time to time, and you often hear her on Radio National. She talks about this environment of, you know, constantly, you know, being in your little world of DVDs and all that kind of stuff as infantilizing the brain. And what she means by this is that when we're very little, it's all about us. Obviously, because you're so little, you don't realise this big world out there. If you want something, you have to have it now, and you have to be told you're wonderful every 2 minutes. There's a lot of indicators, but those are some of them. What she's saying with this generation is with the tweens, they are not growing out of it. You know, usually by the time you get to 10, 11, 12, you might not necessarily have mastered those things, but you're on the way. But she's saying no, and she's saying no in the teenage years. In fact, with Gen Y, and of course not all Gen Ys, we're seeing this in the 20s to 30s, 30 being the new 20. And I think this has masses of implications. You know, you have a boy who's acting out and he's behaving a lot older than he should do. Say he's 9 and he's doing 13-year-old stuff. And we say we have to remind ourselves that he's 9. What I believe, with the research I've looked at, is that he might not have the maturity of a 9-year-old, even though he's in a 9-year-old body. Does that make sense? So we have to really, really, I think, be aware of that. So let's have a quick look at teen life. Body issues is one of the big ones for boys now. Why is that? It's because now, with the marketing to boys, as we've seen to girls, we're seeing a lot more undressed guys. And so the body issue thing is just really taking off, and we're seeing it in 2 ways for boys. We're seeing bigorexia, which is the opposite of anorexia, where they're all pumped up but they don't think they are, or that kind of inner city, heroin chic, androgynous, anorexic look. Of course, they can go onto the net, they can go onto websites where they can learn to live on 200 or 300 calories a day, fool mum and dad they're eating, compete with exercising, and apart from the porn sites, these were the darkest websites I came across on the net, where they have their gallery of pin-ups. And so our beautiful boys now are learning to hate their bodies. You know, isn't it ironic that we live in a country of plenty of good food And we've become so neurotic around one of the great gifts of life, which is not just physical nourishment, but spiritual nourishment. When you're together with people you love and you're eating, it's one of those great moments in life, and we're missing it. What I found with our poor boys is that they're working twice as hard as girls as to find out how they're meant to be, because they don't have the tween and teen mags. And I'm always slightly nervous about saying that, just in case there's somebody somewhere. I know it wouldn't be in this audience where they want to go and set one up. What is really interesting is how clever the advertisers are, that the messages are there constantly. Now, I don't know, I'd seen this crummy ad for Cornetto lots of times, and it makes me cross because you go somewhere, you go to have a Cornetto and you've got to hunt the nut, and the chocolate seems to get less and less, probably because it's all going on the marketing. Anyway, when I got past my being cross with this, I suddenly realised I was missing a very important thing. And this is how constantly the ads are little signs of how we're meant to be. So you can either be the cool twin or the boring twin. So there's a message there about how you wear your hair. Clearly, it's devastating if you put your T-shirts in your pants. I don't know what the iron's about, whether it's you're gay or you're not supposed to help your mum, or crumpled's the way to go. I'm not sure on that one. But can you see how the messages are there? And the way this culture is structured is we see one thing and the kids see another. It's very clever. I talked about the sexualised environment that our boys are growing up in. It is really, really hard because it is full on out there all the time. One of the things that I have noticed in the last 18 months to 2 years is how we are seriously sexualising boys now in advertising. And so we see things, Abercrombie and Fitch is one of the worst, so is Calvin Klein actually. So we have a guy here, his flies undone. You can see the guys in the field there, the guy in front's kind of, his pants are slipping down, so on, so on. I don't think you have to be hugely imaginative to get the fact that that is quite sexualised there. And I quite enjoy the Gruen transfer too, but what they're always saying is that the advertisers who do the wrong thing are the rogue advertisers. Well, that's just rubbish. That's just a catch cry. This is Calvin Klein. And they do some really seriously raunchy stuff. And what we're seeing now is that our kids are being dwarfed, and boys as well as girls, by these sexualised messages that are larger than life all the time. And this is, I think, creating a kind of stud culture where it's cool to be a predator and to be dangerous. And this whole thing of being pumped up is quite interesting, because in previous generations, the men who had great definition in their bodies were men who did manual work. So in a sense, they'd earned that by the sweat of their brow, and it was a genuine strength. It was a strength that was useful to the community, and they were honoured for that. This is nothing about that. This is just about the appearance of, which takes us back to that whole performance culture thing we talked about at the beginning. I mentioned to you that the marketing of boys has taken off in the last few years, and links, of course, are right there. And seriously inappropriate advertising. If you actually go onto the YouTube clips, they are seriously objectionable. And also, it's a normalising of stuff. How is shower gels going to help you with your hangover? I don't know. Probably it's got lots of caffeine in it. I'm not sure. But kind of, it's hangovers, being drunk and horrible. It's just kind of the way you're meant to be. And when I talked to the boys, every single one of them said to me, regardless of their socioeconomic status, their education, the school they went to, they had to drink, because they have got the message from us, that is what manhood is about. And I could tell you lots of hair-raising stories, but they were really emphatic about that. But it's not just the fact they're drinking, and that they're not just drinking to get drunk. When you look at the research at the moment, 8 to 10 standard drinks in a session, and we know that 2 and you're over the limit, is normal for a lot of these kids, and getting heavily stuck into spirits. It's also the subtext that comes with the advertising. The alcohol industry said, we're only talking to adults and that. Well, that's rubbish. And, watch out, birds, pussy posse, all this kind of stuff, And again, because we're not paying any attention to this, it kind of goes past us, but it's all there. Bacardi ads, the sexualised ads that we see there, and, you know, encouraging a kind of double life. We've got it here: librarian by day, Bacardi by night; veterinarian by day, Bacardi by night. This whole thing, you lead a double life, and, you know, only those who are in the inn know what your second life is. And it's also interesting how different it is, the way they market to girls and boys. So it's kind of, you know, the mates thing, you know, just a couple of things of Bacardi in there or whatever. What's this one? Mix a bunch, a batch. You know, it's not a problem. What, of course, they're doing is they are constantly looking for new ways to get kids to consume more. And so one of the latest things is energy drinks with alcohol. And so you can drink all night because you're wide awake. And Sandra Jones at Wollongong University has done some wonderful research into schoolies, and it is just so sickening to see what the expectations before they went there was and what happened afterwards. We don't have time to go through it, but it's like drinking till you vomit and keeping going. You know, like even then you don't stop. Our boys are desperate to be heroes, as we talked about before, and the whole road thing was another thing that there wasn't one boy I spoke to who isn't amazed that they're still alive. Seriously, I know it's a horrendous thing and it's chilling from their experiences in the cars with mates. And again, it's this feeling that they have to get out there and do risky stuff. It's what it's about. Of course, we're surprised and we say, what are they thinking of, and wrapping themselves around poles. But every second action movie has car chases in and stuff, and, you know, the whole audience is in an uproar with it and they think this is heroic. There's a wonderful organisation in New Zealand I came across that's called Big Buddy, and they mentor boys 7 to 12 who don't have a dad in their life. It's an older guy. This is not a formal program where they have to do this, that and the other. It's about hanging out with their mentor and learning the nuances of masculinity. Beautiful things happen. I heard of one story of a little boy. His dad had hung himself in the garage, and so his mum put him in the program, and he had this mentor and he loved him. And when he got to 12, his mum decided she needed to tell him. And so they did a bit of counselling around there, and then she sat him down and said, look, Sean, I never told you the full story, and she told him the full story. You know what that boy at 12 said? And this is what happens when we grow the humanity. He said, Mum, you're not to worry about me because I have my mentor and you have me. Doesn't that strike at the soul? This is what our kids need. They need us to walk so close. You know all this. But it's a fantastic program, getting boys close to their elders. One of the things that teenage boys said to me is they hate the way the media always has bad messages about them. And we do need to catch them doing good stuff. I want to talk a little bit about the porn thing, and then I want to talk about solutions, because there are heaps. The porn industry, of course, boys are very vulnerable to grooming on the net, we know that, and we've talked about the predator thing. The whole thing with the porn industry now is that it is rivaling sports worldwide. That's how much money porn is making, as much money as sports. The thing is, when you log on to a porn site, the expectation is instant arousal, and if you keep going for the same old thing, it doesn't happen. So the porn industry is being pushed to make more and more extreme material. And so porn now is going in two directions. Children, and they've been very clever, they use animated children that now look so real you wouldn't know the difference. And torture of women, and I'm talking serious torture of young girls. Of course, the tragedy is that a lot of these young girls are they're from low-income backgrounds, and they think that by getting in the porn industry, they're going to end up like Gemma Jameson. 3 months later, they're out of the industry and having to have major surgeries and gonorrhea in their eyes and in their throat, and horrendous. What we're now seeing then is a blend of sex and violence as entertainment, and it is slipping into popular culture in all sorts of ways. There were T-shirts, I don't think I've got it on this slide, of Roger David T-shirts of girls who looked like in a crime scene, clearly in a torture situation. If you don't know what's happening with porn, you wouldn't put the two together. When you know, again, it's the code for what's happening. Of course, our boys now are getting involved in porn, and from a very young age, and they're watching it as they would once have watched the footy. Everywhere, of course, we have pornified ad materials, and this Canadian study was showing just how many boys are viewing it. These are 13 to 14-year-olds, a third too many times to count, etc., etc. You know, buying it, accessing it, that's what you do. It's a consumer society. I love this quote, and we've got to keep going, but I did a chapter for a book called Big Porn Inc. a little while ago, where I compared the way pedophiles and sexual predators groom our kids with the way the corporations groom our children. It's exactly the same techniques, finishing up with raunching it up. And I found this quote to finish the chapter, you know, where people say, oh, you know, come on, you know, kind of loosen up a bit. This is again about when our boys and men get involved in this, they're condemned to living on the fringes. What, of course, I found time and time again is how beautifully tender our boys are. And, you know, they're growing up still in a world where they have to suppress emotions, and then they meet that girl they adore, and they open that door, and they're vulnerable. And then they're dumped 3 months later. And this is when a lot of our boys are vulnerable to suicide. And as a society, we don't recognise this enough. The thing is, our boys aren't the problem. It's a toxic world we've brought them into. So really, it's important we all stay up to speed. Now, you probably know a lot of this stuff, but it's really important, I think, that parents know about it. And I think we've got to find a way of a more collegiate approach to these problems. What do I mean by that? I go to talk to educators, I talk to healthcare workers, I talk to police, all sorts of different groups. And I see each group struggling to contain these really big problems. And I think back to my 50s childhood, which, you know, wasn't perfect, but one thing was adults were all on the same page. And I think we've got to find a way to do that again so that they're getting the same message from all of us to make life easier. Of course, a lot of our kids have lots of attitude, as you know. And what I found in my research is, you know, when you start to speak to them, it was all very confident and they'd give you the performance spiel and, you know, it was all quite impressive. But once you got into the detail, then the real person emerged, the vulnerable. I never asked them about them, by the way. I asked them about their friends and they told me everything. They often did seg into themselves. But what I found was the bigger the attitude, the more wobbly the person inside. That the attitude was just a shield with which to meet this very unrelenting world they're in at the moment. So we need to understand them, and they're an information generation. And what I've found, I get a lot of high school kids doing research on different aspects of stuff I've touched on and contacting me, and they are so engaged, wanting to be warriors against this stuff once they've researched it for themselves. So we've got to find ways for them to kind of discover it. Make real life as exciting as the virtual world, and experiences money can't buy. All the stuff, beautiful stuff that was talked about this morning, rooting them in the community, that human connection is so important. I'm a great believer in making things with the hands. I think it's contemplative, it gets that creative juices going again. You can't be wired and do this stuff. And I think also it's wonderful practical life skills. 5 minutes? Oh, good. Phew. I am almost there. And there's some clever things I think we can do. I met this wonderful group in Wagga a little while ago, and there was this wonderful guy there who was a social worker, and they had a group of risky boys that everybody had just given up on almost. And at the edge of town, they had this beautiful old heritage house that had really, you know, it was on its last legs. And he and a group of other guys had the idea to get together, totally, Dorothy, you will love this, this is tailor-made for you, to get together with carpenters and painters and plumbers and to do it up with the boys. Do you know, it changed their lives. For the first time ever, they felt useful, honoured. They saw the results of what they did. One of the things that because of this whole thing with pop culture, that today you're meant to wear your hair this way and your cap that way, and it's, you know, the next day it's like constant homework. I call it striving without ever arriving for this generation. They don't have that satisfaction of going, wow, I've arrived, because there's always so much more to do. And this is, of course, what the boys got. A discussion culture in the home and service. I think you all know about that so well. I really think we've got to get the stress levels down, and we've got to find a way to get them to articulate about this and give them de-stressing mechanisms. Around Australia, the different schools I go to, increasingly they're being taught meditation in schools, and they're finding that hugely helpful with stress and bullying. And boys need a village, we know. And to be reinforced, they need friendships across the generations. These kids are mixing with their peers and parents, and there's not enough wisdom there. Their mums and dads matter. We need media education, but there's a couple of points at the end that we're just going to skip past this. Story we've talked about already. I think we've got to give them a manual of rituals. If they think the only way to celebrate is to get drunk and wander around in their jocks, then is that possibly because we haven't given them a whole lot of ways to celebrate? And I think they need that. They need positive role models. One of my beautiful friends in Sydney has been involved in the men's movement for years, and he's just such a special man. And he goes with at-risk boys, there's a group of them in the inner city boys, and they take them into the bush for the weekend and have camp. And this one particular weekend, they took some Aboriginal elders, and he said it was so interesting, Maggie, how the boys opened up even more with these guys. And he said, we're almost at the end of the time, and he said the most at-risk boy just suddenly broke down and had tears running down his face, and he went to the oldest Aboriginal man. Isn't that interesting? Went to his elder, and this is what he said: what do I have to do to become a man? Doesn't it cut you to the heart? Hundreds and thousands of boys are asking that question, and I don't think we're answering it adequately. They need to be connected to their elders. I have a girlfriend in Perth, and her dad, when he retired, he used to go down to the local oval and watch the boys play footy and cricket, and then when his legs got too wobbly, he'd drive down. And one day Margot said to him, Dad, I haven't heard you talk about going down there. He said, oh, I don't go anymore. I don't want people to think I'm funny. We all know what that means. I never met Margot's dad because he'd passed away long before I met her. Subsequently, she told me he was one of Australia's footy heroes. Not apropos that, just in conversation, and he's in the Hall of Fame. And I thought, what a tragedy. What a tragedy. We have to find a way back to connect our boys with their elders, as well as keep them safe. One final thing. When I finished the book on men and boys, my nephew in New Zealand, who was a great cyclist, and he was in the cycle lane along a motorway with another boy, and he was a great athlete. He was only 15. And he was cycling along this night, practicing for a meet, and this woman, unfortunately, was playing with her radio, lost control of her ute and collected Matty, and he died at the scene, which was pretty horrendous. So we went back to New Zealand for the funeral, and two extraordinary things happened. There was this wonderful hospital chaplain who took the service, and he said, we're here today to honour Matt, but he said, we are here today to grieve men, women, boys and girls. And you know, because he'd given permission, grown men cried at that funeral. Such a powerful thing for a woman to see a man cry. It's deeply human. And because the men cried, the boys cried. And in that moment, we were all more human. But the best was to come. When dear Matty was put in the hearse and we'd all said our goodbyes, and there was kind of a space just behind the hearse, Caleb, the other boy who had cycled with him that night, can you imagine? I often think about Caleb and wonder how he's tracking. Wonderful athlete too, and there were 3 or 4 other boys. They came out quite spontaneously in front of the hearse in that space. And they weren't Māori boys, but they began to dance the haka. Every movement told us of their grief, their bewilderment, their guilt, all those mixed emotions. It wasn't verbalised. And because of my research, I'd realised that with our beautiful men and boys, there are different ways they speak to us. Sometimes we learn as much by what they're not saying as what they're saying. Isn't that right, girls? The inappropriate jokes, which we cringe at, suggesting these are aspects that they haven't really come to terms with in a way that's probably helpful. Our beautiful boys are our tomorrow. Thank you for doing all you can for them. But it's up to us, and you're doing this already. Whoops, I've lost the presentation. It's up to us to shape the future and not to allow the marketers to do it for us. Thank you so much.